Finding thanks. When I think of gratitude and when I think of finding thanks, and I say finding thanks because sometimes it isn't easy to find gratitude. You have to search for it. I inevitably think of my grandparents. All of my grandparents went through the Great Depression. And I always tend to think of my grandfather, Wayne. Wayne was our storyteller, and it's from him and from his mother, Leela, that I think I heard the most stories. Wayne lived and was born in Oklahoma, but he moved all over the place. And one of the things that I loved is that he had so many stories because there was so much that he got into. And my great-grandmother Leela, well, she had 5 boys. 5. 5 things to be thankful for sometimes. Her husband, Dan, amongst other things, was a missionary Baptist preacher. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with preachers during this time, they didn't do it for money. They did it because it was a calling. And he very rarely got paid. And one of the churches that he preached at was a little one out in the country in Oklahoma called Sunshine Missionary Baptist Church. And one of the things that they would do is they would make friendship quilts. And you see 2 of them. I have one right here and the other here. And these have been passed down through my family. What is a friendship quilt? You might be asking. Well, now quilting ran on both sides of my family, and it wasn't necessarily just an art form, it was a necessity. So friendship quilts are pretty special. What you would do is you would take whatever scraps that you had, and during the Depression, that was really all you had to come by if you were a member of my family, and you would make a square. And you can tell all of these are just different, right? Different material. And you weren't looking for something fancy, you were looking for something warm. So each family, and maybe it was just you, maybe it was you and your husband, you would make a square. And when there were enough squares within a community, and often this would be a church, the women would gather together and they would make a quilt. And the reason it's called a friendship quilt is they would, when they were complete, give it to a family that was most in need. Now, my mother has the records for Sunshine because it's a church that no longer exists. And you can see what people would give, what they could. Sometimes it might be a penny. Sometimes it might be a can of beans. And sometimes it was a quilt. So my great-grandfather, Dan, he ended up with some quilts because he had 5 boys. So they slept under them. These weren't looking at quilts. These were for using quilts. And in this particular quilt that I'm holding here, you will see in the pink square, it says, Dan and Leela, my great-grandparents. And you will see the names of the sons that they had at that time. My Uncle Danny was yet to be born. You will see Wayne. And my grandpa said that he did this one himself when he was little. He hand embroidered it. Lois and my Uncle Buck would not appreciate that. He chose to go by Buck, and you'll see Ray, pardon my lisp, and you'll see Vestal. He also chose not to go by that. My great-grandma Leela had a penchant for naming her sons things that they didn't always like. I remember asking Wayne, where did Grandma come up with these names? He said, I think she was just reading one of her romance novels, and when we were born, that was it. I don't know if there's truth to that, but that's what I was told. So quilts. Quilts stitched together by people with love and given with love. Finding thanks in hard times. So these quilts covered those boys. And at the time, in 1935, well, it covered three of them. And my grandpa always said he was stuck in the middle between Buck and Ray. That's because he was younger. And one of the things that he did not appreciate was being stuck in the middle. Now, if you're a middle child, you may appreciate this, but when it was pretty mild outside and they moved around a bit, he said they'd bring the beds out. And he said, and I'd be in the middle. He goes, oh, they'd take the quilt, and they'd stretch it. Buck would stretch it one way, make sure he was tight and warm, and Ray would stretch it the other way. Now, there's only so far you can stretch a quilt. And Wayne said, I was in the middle, and sometimes at night when that breeze would come up, ooh, howdy, it was cold. And he said, but Buck and Ray didn't care. They just pulled it tighter. And I like to imagine those three boys under the quilts and the one in the middle being left out in the cold. The thing about these brothers was that they were also tremendous friends, and they were all storytellers in their own right. Now, they all went to different schools when they had to move. They were migrant workers a lot of the time, and moved at farms and ranches and all sorts of different jobs. And one time, one of the places that they were studying was at a schoolhouse, a one-room schoolhouse. And one of the things that I love about this story is my grandpa always presented it like it was Buck's idea. To this day, I wonder, was it really Buck's idea or did my grandpa have something to do with it? You be the judge. So you had to make your own fun sometimes when you're poor, okay, but also during the Depression. And he said, old Buck had found this really great generator, okay? Now talk about having to find your own fun, okay? And it's one of those hand cranks. So you crank it, and it sent off some electric sparks. They had some ideas about this. So they thought they could play some cops and robbers, but the best part was when you caught the robbers and you make your own electric chair. So they brought it for recess because they thought this will be fun because we can fry more people, right? So all in good fun, right? That's all right. We don't need to be PC. This is what they're going to do. So all the boys got great delight in it, right? Give it a good crank. And Wayne said Buck was real good at making, because he was strong, making it really go and send off those sparks. Well, they had a teacher at this time they did not like. Now, their former teacher, they just loved. She was very, very kind and very nice. But this teacher, Grandpa said, he was very, very like city folk. Just very, prim, proper, didn't get to know the kids well, didn't understand some of the hardships that they were going through. And so he always came in like with a suit, very prim and proper. And when he'd assign the stuff, he didn't go around and help them. He would just sit back in his chair, put his feet up, and read a book. So Buck said, I got an idea. Now, see, this is why I don't know how much my grandpa played a role in this. But who knows, Buck was wily as well. Why don't we run a wire from the crank of the teacher's chair? Put a piece of metal on there, conductor. And I got to say, I applaud the inquiry-based learning that is happening here between my great uncle and my grandfather. And his idea was that they would crank it real good and give that teacher some spark. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, how are they going to do this without the teacher knowing? Well, they would set it up during recess when the teacher would leave. And then Buck would say he had to go use the outhouse because, of course, there's no indoor plumbing. Well, that's exactly what they did. Can I go out? Let them go out. Now, all the boys were in on it. The girls, no clue. Boys were in on it, and they were waiting. Grandpa said, sure enough, you can see him start to squirm. And he said, and all of a sudden, you know that Buck must have given it one good crank. Because suddenly, boy, howdy, that teacher jumped up. And the boys couldn't help but laugh. And some of them were looking towards the window where you could see Buck out there still cranking because he didn't know what was happening inside. Well, teacher turned and looked, and he saw Buck out there working real hard. And that was it. Called all those boys up, lined them up, put your hands out, smack it with a ruler. That's right. Anyone who's really young here, corporal punishment did exist in schools, but that was nothing compared to what happened when they all had to bring a letter home. And yes, they all showed their parents a letter because it'd be worse if they didn't. And they got whooped. And I'd like to imagine how they felt when they went under the blanket that night. Not feeling guilty at all. Grandpa said it was worth the whooping. Oh, to see him fly up out of that chair. Finding thanks however you can. Well, the quilt witnessed it all. But sometimes it's hard to find thanks. Grandpa said they were always supposed to have a sister. Baby girl Hudson. She never got a name. All of them were born at home. Grandpa said if there had been a doctor, he's sure that she would have lived. But she was born stillborn. He said she had beautiful dark hair. Thick. Oh, all those boys wanted her. A little girl. Can you imagine? Those 5 boys taking care of that little girl. It wasn't meant to be. And I imagine the quilts there, watching it all. Baby girl Hudson. Well, soon enough a time came where they couldn't survive anymore in Oklahoma. There just was nothing left. And the quilts came with them when they went out to California. Now, you have to understand that for Leela, my great-grandmother, she knew that she wouldn't see most of these people again. I got Floy on here. I got Nora. Got Mrs. Hampton. I got Emma. People that I'll never see in my life. People I'll never know the stories of. But they were people that held the stitches together and made these with love. And beyond that, her family too. But they left because they needed a better opportunity. Now, when they went to California, they were migrant workers. And they moved wherever they had to in order to find a job. And times were rough for people from Oklahoma out in California. Now, they thought that was going to be a land where they'd be able to make something, right? That's what it was all promised. But soon as they opened their mouth, everyone knew they were from Oklahoma. And a lot of businesses back then had signs posted saying, no Okies here, don't apply. Till the day he died, my grandpa sounded like he was from Oklahoma. It was rough, but they had each other. And these quilts saw them through. And they kept them. They kept them, and they had them. First time my grandpa met Jean, my grandmother. He was working in a peach orchard, the same as her, up in Northern California. Oh, and when they got introduced by a mutual friend, my grandpa said to his friend, that's the girl I'm going to marry. I heard this story so many times, and I remember one time I asked Grandma, what did you think? You know what she said? I don't think I thought anything. And they did marry, and they had 3 kids. They had 3 kids, and 2 boys, 1 girl. And the girl, Sharon, is my mama. And Sharon slept underneath one quilt, and the 2 boys slept underneath another. And this is how thanks is passed down. Friendship and love. I'd like to say those 3 kids did not give Wayne and Jean any problems, but I would be lying, because they did. My mother played just as rough as those boys, and so I have smashed gender stereotypes to the ground ever since I was a child. One of my favorite stories is my grandmother had this little China horse, this figurine, and they were all roughhousing. And by roughhousing, I mean they were fighting. They were brawling in the living room. And grandmother and my grandpa weren't at home. Well, they were roughhousing and brawling right into a side table where this was, knocked it over. All the legs fell off of it. Now, the kids' names, David, Mike, and Sharon. All right. Now, I believe it was David that came up with this brilliant plan, but I could be wrong. My mother will correct me. They decided that their brilliant plan, instead of coming clean, they were going to not glue the legs back on, okay? They were just going to very carefully set the body of the horse on top of these delicate legs. My mom, Sharon, said it took forever. And all 3 of them to delicately balance the 4 legs, these really tiny legs, and the horse on top. And they balanced it. I don't know what they thought was going to happen when my grandma went to dust. Like the legs just miraculously fell off when you picked the horse up. Because this is what happened. So when my grandma goes to dust, here's Jean. She's dusting. She picks up the horse. The legs just fall off. It's a miracle from God. It's horseless. It's not horseless. It's legless. Jean, bless her heart, was one of the funniest women I ever knew. She just started laughing and laughing and laughing so loud that the kids all came up to see what was happening, and she was crying. And they were afraid to ask, like, you okay? Because they don't want to get in trouble. And she just said, I can't even be mad at you. Did you actually think that was going to work? And I like to imagine them under their quilt and all of their shenanigans. Oh, those children. My uncles, my mom, Wayne and Jean, Leela and Dan, and all the names of all the people whom I never met that came together. Finding thanks. It's a hard thing. It can be hard when the people you care for aren't here. Where times are hard, period. When you're quarantined in your home, where you can't spend time with those that you love. But sometimes finding thanks maybe only be 1 square away. Maybe it is 1 memory. Maybe it is the stories that we stitch together. But thanks is something that you can find if you search. And remember that, like these quilts, we are all made up of other people. And that is what holds us together. Thank you.